Dear Blizzard, are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? What is this? What is this? Hi, it's me, Austin Blizzard, and today I'm looking at this crazy idea that you came up with. What? I mean, stabbing a planet with a giant sword? Did you think that I wouldn't notice this? I mean, putting aside the fact that you've stolen a vast amount of plot stuff from Final Fantasy VII, complete with a giant space demon trying to injure a living planet and its blood being jealously hunted as a natural resource. Oi! 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 What's that? Matt's episode on the moon and Majora's Mask? Never heard of it! Okay. Deep breaths. Coming out the gate with freaking out is gonna leave you with quite the 10 to reach for the third act break. Okay. Whew. Alright, this thing. Let's do this. How screwed is Azeroth now that it's been stabbed by a giant sword by a space demon? For context, for those of you who don't know, because the last time you played WoW was like 200 years ago, like me before a few months ago, Azeroth is like a space egg for Titans, who are the space gods of World of Warcraft. Sargeras is this guy. He's a Titan who's been corrupted by fell magic and is the leader of the Burning Legion, who are fairly responsible for most of the bad stuff happening in World of Warcraft. Not all of it, but most of it. Anyway, a lot of stuff is happening, and now there's a demon moon orbiting Azeroth, which has gotta be hell on the tides. And boy howdy do I wish I could get into orbital mechanics in this episode, but there's no time! Anyway, the Legion is doing Legion stuff and is trying to attack Azeroth, because of course it is. At the climax of the last expansion, Legion, Sargeras is launching an all-out Hail Mary attack on Azeroth and plunges his freaking sword, this huge thing, into the planet. That, my friends, is big sword energy if ever I saw it. The current expansion deals with the fallout to this event, which, like, apparently is not everyone digging deep into shelters to survive the coming apocalypse. Okay then. So what would the consequences of something like this even be? There's some speculation online, but I didn't read it because I believe in not polluting my research, and I guarantee you that they have not measured as much as I have, because I get paid for this. Just this. It is embarrassing. I hate myself. Anyway, in order to even remotely figure out what kind of damage this sword is doing, if any, we have to figure out how much force it's imparting into the planet. And no, unfortunately, all you naughty Nancys out there ready to jump on me, we don't know how much mass the thing has because we don't know what it's made out of. Thankfully, with some clever workarounds, we can still measure the force it imparts into the planet. More on that in a bit. Getting objective measurements in World of Warcraft is tricky. They do have yard specifications in some spells, but, well, for one, I hate yards. And for two, figuring out the exact range of some of these in order to get precise measurements is difficult. For three, using this to measure the dimensions of a giant space sword is actually more difficult than you might think. Thankfully, we have another answer. Cannon heights. Now, we can't use the canon heights of important characters because part of Blizzard's design philosophy is to make the important heroes impossibly huge. But we have a sneaky workaround. Player characters have canon heights. Like my Night Elf Druid is exactly 7 feet tall, and this is easily the most important measurement I need, because I need to figure out a ton of stuff that vertical measurements are going to make a hell of a lot easier than horizontal ones. First of all, we need to know fall speed, because we're going to use that to measure the length of the blade, with a bunch of annoying pixel math that would be, at this point, me rehashing stuff I've talked about a million times. I found out that the top speed is 53.9 meters per second, which is really interesting, actually, because it's actually pretty close to the terminal velocity of humans on Earth. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but that's pretty cool nevertheless. Also, of note, gravity on Azeroth is way higher than Earth's, clocking in at a whopping 30 meters per second squared. That isn't that important just yet, and it's definitely not surprising, since since most video games have higher gravity than our own, but it does mean that Azeroth is significantly more massive than Earth. More on that later. Knowing our fall speed and acceleration rate, we can measure how long the blade of the sword is. It took me a tremendously long time to hit the ground from the starting point, almost 22.5 seconds, meaning that the blade, just the exposed part, is over a freaking kilometer long at 1164.9 meters. Now, extending this out to the cinematic, we can find out how big the sword is in total. We have to do this because we have to know exactly how much of this thing is embedded into Azeroth in order to know how much damage it would do. Doing this, I figured out that the blade alone is 2,642.74 meters long. Holy crap, that's over 1.5 miles. Counting the hilt, it's over 3,953.81 meters, or 2.45 miles. That's freaking nuts. I don't know what this is made out of, but I'm pretty sure the structural properties... I don't know what this is made out of, but I'm pretty sure that the structural properties of most materials would not stay together at this size and shape. Ah, well. Knowing this, we can figure out with easy math that 1,477.84 meters of the sword is buried into Azeroth. That's over 13.5 football fields deep, but, I don't know, it's going pretty slowly, right? I mean, look, he just kind of gently nudges it in there. It can't be that bad, right? Wrong! Well, it looks like the sword is moving slowly from this perspective. If you measure it out, this thing is moving at over Mach 2, almost Mach 3 at 959 meters per second. But in order to figure out how bad this thing actually is for Azeroth, we're gonna have to use a tool that some of you might find intimidating: trigonometry. Trigonometry does sound intimidating at a glance, but it's literally just triangle math. All math that has to do with triangles and the angles inside them. It means that in basic geometry, you were probably doing some trig without even realizing it. The Pythagorean theorem is just reductive trigonometry. But in order to do this math today, we're gonna have to do something a little bit trickier: 3D trigonometry. You see, this sword isn't flat. It's not just some one molecule thick razor blade. This thing is freaking huge. And remember, before I said we couldn't figure out the force imparted by this thing from the mass of the sword because we don't know it, but we do know the mass of Azeroth. And if we can figure everything else out, we can figure out how much mass it displaces and how quickly, and that will get us where we need to go. And that is what Trig is gonna help us with today. All the information we need is actually right here. All we need to have is the thickness of the sword at its base, 166 meters, the wideness here at the widest point, the length, which we already have, and the length of the sword that's in the ground, and we have everything we need because of two mathematical laws, one of which was invented, I kid you not, over 1,000 years ago in... well, it's not exactly certain who specifically came up with it, but it's one of 4 dudes in what is now known as Tajikistan, Baghdad, or Afghanistan, while the other law dates back to over 2,400 years ago, and those are both the law of sines and the law of cosines, which specifically govern angles and how they interact with spheres and triangles. Now, while this sword is not a perfect geometric shape, we're gonna underestimate its size a tad so we can have some wiggle room, and when you do that, this thing is what's known as a rhombic pyramid. Rhombic because the base is a rhombus, and it's a pyramid as opposed to a prism because it has a point at the top called an apex. We need to do 3-dimensional geometry because we need to figure out exactly how much of Azeroth is displaced by this thing when it's stabbed into the ground. And in order to figure that out, we need to figure out the volume of the section that's inside the ground. Like, okay, alright, this is the whole sword, right? And here's the entire thing as a triangle. If we draw a line here across it to represent the ground, we have effectively 2 triangles now, one large one and one smaller one nested inside it on the bottom. Now, due to the laws of geometry, this angle here and this angle here are identical, so we just gotta figure out what this angle is. Once we know that, we can bisect this thing down the middle, make some right angles, abuse old Pythagoras, and be on our way. Thankfully, since this triangle, the side view of the pyramid, is an isosceles triangle, which means that these 2 sides are the same length and these 2 angles are the same, and we know what the base width is and the height is, most of our job is already done for us. We just have to bust out good old SOHCAHTOA. Oh, do you not remember what that is? You know what? Don't even feel bad. I have to look up every single time too. And I even mess it up sometimes still even then. SOHCAHTOA is a mnemonic device that's supposed to help you remember which functions to use to find unknowns. Sine is when you have the opposite side and the hypotenuse sign. Cosine is when you know the adjacent side to an angle and the hypotenuse. And tangent is for the opposite side and the adjacent side to the the angle. There's also some other crappy mnemonic devices like some of her children are having trouble over algebra and Tom's old aunt sat on her chair and hollered. But I propose a new one. Can Austin help shouting over his tinnitus-oppressed audience? Ugh, honestly, there's like so much to do here, so I'm like gonna have to go through this really fast, so strap your butts into the chairs. It's time to go fast! We know how long the sword is in total, we know the base length, and if we bisect this here and divide the base by 2, we can use the Pythagorean theorem, c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared, to get the hypotenuse, the long side of the sword here. Since we know all these sides and we want to know this angle here, we got a lot of options, but we're gonna use the inverse tangent function, since we know the sides, but we don't know the angles, which gets us an angle of 85.65 degrees, which means the angle here where the sword meets the ground is also 85.65 degrees. Now we're cooking with gas! Now we gotta figure out a few things to get all of our answers. All the dimensions of the sword cross-section from the front, all the dimensions of the sword cross-section from the side, and the dimensions of the rhombic base. Now that we know this angle here, 85.65, we also know this angle here because this is a right triangle, and all angles in a triangle have to add up to 180. So 180 minus 90 minus 85.65 gives us 4.345 degrees here. Now we can use another function to find this side here. Which one do we use? Can Austin help shouting over his tinnitus-oppressed audience? Tinnitus-oppressed audience because we know the angle and the adjacent side. 1,477 tangent 4.345 degrees gets us 112.29 meters, or a full base of this cross-section of 224.5 meters. Divide that by 2 back to 112.29 Pythagorean some stuff, and we get a length of this edge here of 1,082 meters. Bam! Cross-section 1 done! Cross-section 2 is the exact same math as cross-section 1, but with different numbers, which gives us a base of 93. Divide by 2, Pythagoras, bam! These sides are 1,478 meters. One more cross-section to go! Looking down on the sword, you can see that we've already figured out these diagonals. This is the base of cross-section 1, and this is the base of cross-section 2, which we can multiply together and divide by 2 to get the area. 10,473 square meters, and we can use the Pythagorean theorem again to get the sides, 121 meters. Woo! Done with the dimensions of the sword! Woohoo! All of this means that we have an internal volume of the sword just in the ground of over 5.1 million cubic meters. That's like the size of the entire freaking Hoover Dam. But what does this mean? What does it mean? Because while it's meaningful to say that 5.1 million square meters of Azeroth is displaced by the sword, we don't know of what. And this is where the acceleration due to gravity I mentioned earlier becomes really important. Because knowing the surface gravity, all we have to know is the size of Azeroth, and we can figure out its mass, which allows us to get its density. Perspectives are difficult, but using the most revealing angle in the cinematic, we can expand Azeroth to a full circle and use the sword length, which we know of 3,953 meters, and we can figure out that Azeroth has a radius of 4,243 meters. Point of interest, this means that Sargeras stabs his sword over a third of the way toward Azeroth's core. If that were scaled up to our planet, it'd be a sword stabbing over 2,200 kilometers. Over 1,000 miles! Oh my gosh. Anyway, using some gravitational formulas and isolating our unknown variables, we can figure out that Azeroth has a mass of 8.16 quintillion kilograms, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually only 0.0001367832887% of the mass of the Earth. That's less massive than 3 Juno, the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt. But Azeroth is very dense. It has over 25 million kilograms of mass per cubic meter, over 4,000 times the density of Earth. So this means that when this sword is inserted over 3 seconds, it's displacing 1.31 trillion kilograms of mass, pushing it to the side in the same volumetric space as the sword itself, over 118.23 meters. One whole football field in 3 seconds at a top speed of 39 meters per second, or 88 miles per hour, with an acceleration of 13 meters per second. A force, when you accommodate a modest force of friction of over 2.5 quadrillion newtons over 1,477 meters, releasing 3.8 quintillion joules of energy. The power released by over 14 of the world's most powerful nuclear bomb ever detonated, the Tsar Bomba. Or the kinetic energy released by over 21 sextillion farts all at once, which is 1.1 million times the total number of farts that have ever been farted by all the humans in all of human history. Azeroth would be totally screwed. I'm talking about fallout and winters caused by what is effectively a giant doomsday device detonated on an absolutely tiny planet. And on a planet this small, this would easily be deep enough to trigger cataclysmically huge earthquakes that would trigger massive collapses of cities, not to mention the massive shockwave caused by a sword this large, displacing over 64 million kilograms of what is a pretty thick atmosphere, which would create the loudest, well, I was gonna say sound, but at some point, rushing molecules of air smushed together to form a giant wall of force stops being a sound and just starts being terrifying. In any case, everyone not completely buried underground or in raids would have their eardrums burst. This single thing would be the worst thing that's ever happened to Azeroth, and yet everyone's just like, no big deal, let's walk around mining god blood. Sure, buddy. As far as I'm concerned, all of World of Warcraft now is some collective hallucination from a handful of dying sentient races as they bleed out under rubble of what once used to be a beautiful planet but is now a crumbling pile of garbage. Sincerely, Austin. Hey, do you want to join my Discord and talk with other people who like my show and like to talk about science and, like, other random garbage? Like, we have 1,000 people, so it's like a lot. Go to discord.gg/thescience, and you will be able to join right away and get to talk with a bunch of other fans. And there should be a link in the description, I think. Should be good. Somewhere in there. You can dig for it. It's in there. Also, subscribe to the Game Theorists. Do it. Do it right now.